Hey everybody, welcome back. And today we have something a little different. Only a little different though, because I've done a few of these. Today we have a book review. The book is Tender Loving Fun, A Guide to Adult Babysitting by Sam McCue, with input from Rosalie Bent. Now, that's a person who I've discussed a couple of times. I don't know what to make of the situation. So, once again, if you're somebody out there that is very conscientious about who you give money to, it's just something maybe you consider. I'm not as apprehensive about it anymore. I don't know. The information from that person has from Rosalie Bent is good information. It's accurate. It's high quality information. So, I don't know. It's up to you. Do your own research. I'm not here to tell you who to side with in little community clique clashes. I don't care. I wish there was better reporting in our community about bad actors. That way we could all know for sure, but there's just the community's too disparate. We all need to come together a little more and talk a little more and share information that we do have a little bit better. So, that all being said, this book in and of itself I felt was a worthwhile purchase. I probably should have looked it up to see how much I paid for this. I don't remember. It wasn't very much. It is 9 chapters, 99 pages, averaging 11 pages per chapter. Of course, it doesn't actually work out that way. Some chapters are longer and shorter, but average, and it's not bad. I read it in one day. In fact, it was only 2 or 3 hours I spent probably total reading this. I took a couple of breaks and came back to it. But yeah, it was definitely an easy read. It's nothing that's, it's not a big deep dive, intense read. But it is good. It is good information, and I think it was well thought out and well executed. So, chapter 1, it's a really good breakdown of what age play is, and it's actually, I think, a good primer for somebody that's maybe not as familiar with it. Maybe they're just peripherally aware that it exists. They don't really know about it. Or maybe they've never heard of it at all, which I think at this point in modern society, most people are at least aware that this exists. So, but it's a good enough breakdown of it without getting too into the weeds about the psychology and stuff like that. But it's sincere and deep enough to where, if somebody is thinking about taking on a caregiver role, it's going to give them the right impression. It's going to give them the right information. And it's, well organized. It's got great bullet points that they hit explaining what everything is, and, how to look at the dynamic and what the expectations are for each person within that dynamic. So, chapter 2 is pretty much strictly a narrative about one of the author's experiences, and having read through it, I feel like it's a good framework for, how things should be and how things should feel for both people involved. It paints a great picture of, what a caregiver can do and the effect that has on the little, and, also, talking about how it feels to be a little and what the significance of the actions of the caregiver are, like how that makes us feel and those things. So this is a really good thing to read. I think it paints the right picture for somebody that is coming into a caregiver role. Chapter 3 is it's really just excellent guidance excuse me, for kind of starting the process and finding a way to navigate those beginning stages and communicate, and placing an emphasis on communication and, ideas about what to communicate and, how to understand what's trying to be achieved. And there's a lot of emphasis in this chapter on about the idea of the little getting into little headspace and staying there, and making sure that you're not unnecessarily taking them out of little headspace, and emphasizing that that's what the point of all of this is to help them get into little space and stay there. And here's some pitfalls, common pitfalls to avoid, and here's some things that you can do to help encourage staying in little space. And it just really well thought out and well written, I think. And that theme of getting into and staying into little space is kind of a reoccurring theme throughout the rest of the book. Because chapter 4 is where it moves into kind of like, breaking down the different categories of activities. And chapter 4 is where the how to engage kind of starts. And that's a repeated theme, is here's some things you can do and here's some ways to go about it. And he always brings it back to, because that helps the person stay in little, it's kind of a thing. So, but yeah, chapter 4, is a great breakdown of kind of how to ease into the dynamic, how to take it slow. It's a well thought out framework on ways to go slow, but to really test the waters and see what works for both people, and how to find enjoyment or get maximum enjoyment for both people out of the dynamic, which is great. Chapter 5 is all about naps and playtime, which is a big thing. It's a big part of what we do. As adults, we don't take naps nearly enough. I don't nap. I don't ever really have the opportunity to nap. I have too much stuff to do in my life, So when I do nap in little space, that's a big deal for me. And playtime, my playtime as a little is very limited. So, it's I can sit back and think, if somebody were to try and help me, and be a caregiver, these are two very important aspects. So, once again, it's a great list of ideas on how to structure naps and playtimes, and there's a very thorough list of play ideas. There's a lot of it kind of breaks it down by categories of different things that could be played with, from creative stuff like watercolor painting, finger painting, Play-Doh, that kind of stuff, to different kinds of toys like trucks and this and that, coloring, of course, dolls, and just all the different kinds of ways that a little could play, and ideas for kind of how to go about that, and how to engage with a little on those levels. It's really good. As a little reading through this, I'm like, yep, this guy has really thought this out and encapsulated, and communicated very well to non-littles that this is what being, this is a major part of being little, is, doing these things that get us into and keep us into that headspace, and these activities are a very big part of that. So it was a great chapter. Chapter 6, bottles, burping, and baby food. Most of this is centered around the author's personal experiences, but it's it's a great set of ideas on how to have that conversation. So even for me, I really couldn't relate to some of the stuff that he was saying, or what his preferences are. I'm like, that ain't me. I don't function the same way. But somebody could read this book and then have an idea of what to ask me, things to ask me, and help have that conversation, and have it be a two-way conversation, instead of just me trying to figure out a way to outline what I want, what I need my experience to be. This would be a way for me to hand them this book and say, okay, read this. And they can be like, okay, well, when it comes to this aspect, what do you, how do you feel about these things? And I could say, oh yeah, well, the stuff he was describing I can't really relate to. Here's how, it is for me. So it really, especially, and that's kind of the overall thing, I think, with this book, is that even as a little reading this and saying, okay, well, I can't really relate to that. That's not how I want my experience to be. That's not, how I little. It doesn't invalidate his experiences and his way of being little. But at the same time, if I were to hand this book to somebody and say, okay, here, read this and then let's talk, they would be able to ask me questions like, well, okay, well, what do you think about this and that and this? And I can say, okay, well, that's one place where he and I differ, and I like this and don't like that, So it's still, it's a really great chapter. Chapter 7 is just all about diapers. And man, this is a fairly in-depth dive into the different types of diapers and options, and and it's not just the types, but it's also the pros and cons of each. He's like, okay, well, there's cloth diapers, but there's cloth diapers that are pre-fold that you pin, and there's ones that are have snaps, and there's ones that have Velcro, and here's the advantages and disadvantages of all of them, and then it's breaks down like, hey, here's what's going on with like disposables now, so it's like, and here's the advantages of using disposables as opposed to cloth, And then continues into like methods for, cleanup and disposal during changes, or cleanup or disposal during changes, things like that. And then there's, he goes into talking about like using powder and creams and wipes and things like that, and ideas on how to deal with those things. And it's really good sound advice. This is somebody that's, had multiple babysitters, in his life. And I can't get a full gauge on just how much older he is than me, but he's a little bit older than me for sure. And definitely more experienced, because my experiences have actually been pretty limited, even though I've been, wearing and stuff for 20 years and practicing age regression. My experience interacting on that level has been pretty limited, and for a lot of bad reasons. Then he finishes out with like some guidance on how to like interact with a little, during changes, and like I think he gives an example of how one of his babysitters used to talk with him as they were changing him. So it's a really great, like, as a little you read this and you're like, yeah, man, if I could find somebody that's how they behave, that would be amazing. Chapter 8, baths. I've actually never had somebody like bathe me as a little, but pretty much everything in this chapter was like, yeah. It's like, yes, this is like, and I can say this as a parent. He keeps talking about how, like, when you're doing this, it's, be doing it as if it was a little kid, and as a parent, I know what that experience is from the other side, so I can say that, yeah, this is good advice, because he's basically saying, like, just pretty much act like a caregiver, which is what a parent does, and yeah, it's a great chapter. I would love to just even once have one experience like what he describes in this chapter. So then chapter 9 is the closeout. It's a nice streamlined synopsis of what this book is really about and why. And it's a great reinforcement of all the important points that he makes in the book. There's even a section that could have been its own section. Even he could have had 10 chapters here about outings, going, the caregiver and the little going out into the world, and there's a lot of really like sound advice about how to kind of like navigate those situations and make sure that you're, number one, keeping each other safe, and not exposing each other out in public, and also not forcing other people who have not given consent to engage with you guys in this dynamic, and just kind of like not making it obvious to the rest of the world, and finding little subtle ways to keep keep the dynamic up between the two of you without making it obvious to the rest of the world, which, if you're of the sound mind in this community, if you're really, thinking with your head on straight, then you really can't agree with that, because the three cardinal rules of any kind of kink or atypical behavior is safe, sane, consensual. So the general public, is not consenting to this. This is a private thing between two people. So the points he makes about that and ways to go about that are excellent. And I really I loved the ending of this. And then he just kind of brings it back around to the final point that, like, hey, this is about, this person having these emotional needs, and, you as the caregiver, have some kind of affinity that makes you interested in helping that person to achieve those feelings and meet those needs. And in the end, it's about having fun and making it a positive experience for both parties. And so it's just a really, really good book. So if you are a caregiver, or a little who's looking for a caregiver, and you don't know what to do as far as how to go about finding one, and if you find somebody that's willing, how to kind of help them navigate the beginning stages, pick up this book. If you're little, you should pick up this book and have it on hand just in case you meet that person. I was going to have my now ex-girlfriend read this book, but the relationship kind of failed on adult reasons. Had nothing to do with any of this. It was just incompatibility for a completely different reason. But that was why I bought this book, and I absolutely, the next chance I hopefully get to tell somebody about this part of myself and bring them into my life in a caregiver role, this is the book I'm going to put in their hands. So Sam McCue, even though that's not your real name and it says so on the back, thank you for writing this book. It was a good read. It's a worthwhile read. It was a fairly easy read for as good as it is. And I think it's a actually valuable addition to any ABDL library, as well as being a great asset to our community. So, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you'll go out and check out this book. Once again, that's Tender Loving Fun. You can find it on Amazon. It's not very expensive at all. So, until next time, stay padded.